My little brother's body trembled like a leaf as I held him under the bed, covering his tiny ears so he wouldn't hear the screams coming from the next room. It was in that moment I understood that hell wasn't underground, like Father Johnson said during Sunday service. Hell was right here, inside our own home. My name is Mildred Millie Thompson, but everyone here in Pine Hollow, this forgotten corner of rural Kentucky, knows me as Miss Millie the Doll Lady. I'm 87 years old, with thin white hair like cotton candy and hands twisted by arthritis from making the cloth dolls I sell at the county fair. I'm curious to know where all of you are watching from on this beautiful planet of ours. I'm looking forward to reading all your comments. Before I continue, please subscribe to the channel and like this video. It really helps the team at Grandparents' Tales bring you new videos every day, which saves many women who need to hear our voices and find courage. I was born in 1938 in a simple but tidy house on the outskirts of town. Our home wasn't much, but my father, Joseph Thompson, always insisted on keeping everything clean and organized, even with the little he earned working in the coal mines that made our town known. Every day he'd leave early, with the lunch pail I'd prepared myself after I turned 9, and wouldn't return until the sun had disappeared behind the hills. He'd come home covered in black dust, his eyes red from all that coal dust, but always with a little smile at the corner of his mouth and something small for my brother Tommy, who was 5 years younger than me. "Look what Daddy brought you, Tommy," he'd say, pulling out a wooden car he'd whittled during his breaks, or a piece of candy he'd bought by saving on cigarettes. He was too good a man for the cruel world we lived in. My mother, Caroline, was what folks called a modern woman back then. Beautiful enough to make your eyes ache, but with a dangerous kind of beauty that made men lose their minds and women purse their lips. Curly black hair she always kept perfectly styled, a tiny waist she cinched even smaller with those corsets, and a way of walking that made every man turn his head when she passed by. While Daddy worked like a condemned man in the mines, beneath that scorching sun, Mama was always inventing commitments around town. I'm helping with the church bazaar. I'm visiting my sick friend. I need to go to the general store for sewing thread. And off she'd go, all perfumed up with bright red lipstick, even though everyone knew you didn't need lipstick to go to church or visit a sick friend. Daddy never questioned her. He came home so tired he could barely eat what I'd warmed up from lunch, when we had any. Then he'd take a basin bath to wash off the black dust and fall into bed, often without waiting for Mama to return. And she came back later and later, smelling of fancy cigarettes, the kind decent women didn't even know the smell of, sweet liquor on her breath, and sometimes with marks on her neck that she'd cover the next day with face powder or a colorful scarf tied around her throat. "That's just a mosquito bite, girl. Stop being nosy," she'd say, when I, already 12 years old, looked suspiciously at those purple marks. The worst part wasn't the blatant lie. It was seeing Daddy pretend to believe it, lowering his eyes as if he were the one who had done something wrong. "Where did your mother go, Millie?" he'd sometimes ask, sitting on the front step, lighting a hand-rolled cigarette. "She went to the drugstore for headache medicine," I'd lie, repeating what she had instructed me to say before leaving. He would just shake his head, take a deep drag on his cigarette, and release a small puff of smoke that seemed to carry all the sadness in the world. How I hated lying to my father. To this man who never denied me anything, who even when coming home dead tired, still found the energy to help me with my schoolwork, to tell Tommy a story before bed. But Mama had made it very clear what would happen if I opened my mouth. "If your father finds out the truth, he'll leave, Millie, and you'll be without a father. Is that what you want?" Afraid of losing Daddy, I kept quiet. Today, looking back, I see that was my first big mistake. The silence I maintained out of fear ended up costing much more than I could have imagined at the time. Mama's absences became more frequent, longer. There were times she was gone 2-3 days, returning as if she'd just gone to the corner store for bread. I had to help my cousin who had a baby. I stayed at my friend's house because she got sick. And when those 3 days just happened to coincide with the county fair visiting town, or when some handsome traveling salesman was staying at Mrs. Betty's boarding house, pure coincidence, of course. Meanwhile, life at home was me trying to keep everything running. At 13, I was already cooking, washing, ironing, taking care of Tommy as if it were my duty. Daddy tried to help on weekends, but work in the mine was so hard that he could barely lift his arms on Sunday. Still, he made a point of taking us to church, always clean and tidy, as if he wanted to show the whole town that we were a respectable family, despite the rumors that were already spreading about my mother. It was around this time that I noticed something strange happening with Tommy. My little brother, who had always been cheerful and talkative, started to become quiet, frightened. He stopped wanting to play with the other boys after school, would hide under the bed when he heard footsteps approaching, and started wetting the bed again, something he hadn't done since he was very little. "What's wrong, Tommy? Is someone threatening you at school?" I asked one night while helping him change the wet sheets before Daddy saw. He just shook his head, his little eyes full of fear, but didn't say anything. I thought it was some school bully, as there always is. But the worst was yet to come. And I, in my girlish innocence, couldn't imagine the horror that was happening under our own roof. Those of you who are following me this far, if you could leave a comment saying where you're watching this video from. It gives me strength knowing there are people listening after keeping this story inside me for so many years. And if you can, leave a like so this account reaches more people who might need to hear that it's possible to survive even the worst nightmares. Things at home got worse gradually, like water that slowly heats until it boils without you noticing. Daddy was getting thinner, more stooped, not just from the hard work, but from the weight of that situation he pretended not to see. Tommy more quiet each day, frightened, cowering in corners like an injured animal. And Mama, when she was home, treated Daddy as if he were an annoyance, an old piece of furniture you have to step around. "Joseph, go buy cigarettes for me," she'd order as soon as he sat down to rest after work. "But, Caroline, I just got home, my legs are heavy," he'd reply meekly. "If your legs are so heavy, how do you manage to walk around the mine all day? Go on, man, don't be lazy." And off Daddy would go, dragging those tired legs to Mr. Davis's general store just to please that woman who didn't deserve even the sweat of his labor. One night, Daddy had to go to Lexington to pick up some new tools for the mine and was going to stay overnight. Mama, of course, took advantage of the opportunity and left saying she was going to the prayer meeting, all perfumed and in a new dress. I stayed home taking care of Tommy, who didn't want to eat properly, just kept looking at the door fearfully. "Will she come back, Millie?" he asked, trembling when I finished cleaning the kitchen. "Yes, but later. Let's go to bed. We have school tomorrow," I answered, trying to seem calm, even knowing she probably wouldn't return until the next morning. That night, I woke up to a strange noise. At first, I thought it was some animal on the roof, but when I listened carefully, I realized it was crying. The muffled crying of my brother coming from his little room. I got up worried, thinking he'd had another nightmare. When I opened his door, the moonlight coming through the window showed a scene that froze my blood. Mama was sitting on Tommy's bed, one hand covering his mouth while the other— my God, how hard it is to talk about this even after so many years. The other hand doing things that a mother should never, ever do to a child. I stood paralyzed in the doorway, unable to scream, unable to move. She was the one who saw me first, glazed eyes, smelling of whiskey and cigarettes. "What are you looking at, girl? Go to your room right now and don't open that mouth to anyone, you hear me? Nobody would believe you anyway." It was like a bucket of ice water had fallen on my head. Suddenly, everything made sense. Tommy's fear, the bedwetting, the terror when Mama came home at night. It wasn't new. How long had this been happening under my nose? How long had my little brother been suffering in silence while I slept in the next room? That night changed everything inside me. It was as if something had broken, a shattered glass that could never be put back together. Trembling like a leaf, I went back to my room and locked myself in, pushing the dresser in front of the door. I couldn't sleep, my heart beating like a drum at a revival meeting, tears streaming nonstop. How could a mother do that to her own child? The next morning, when the sun was already coming through the cracks in the window, I heard Mama leaving the house, slamming the door, probably going to meet one of those men she called friends. Only then did I have the courage to leave my room. I went straight to Tommy's little room and found him curled up under the bed, staring at nothing, as if he had seen the devil himself. "Come here, little brother," I said, extending my hand, trying not to show the terror still running through my veins. Come, let's have breakfast and then go to school. Tommy came out slowly, his little eyes swollen from crying, his pajamas all wrinkled and damp. Without saying anything, he came close to me, grabbed onto my skirt, and began to sob. "Since when, Tommy?" I asked softly, stroking that hair that I myself cut with the sewing scissors. "Since when has Mama been doing this to you?" "A long time, Millie," he answered in a heartbreaking little voice. "It started when you got sick that time, with the high fever, and Daddy had to sleep in town to get medicine." My God, that had been almost 2 years ago. 2 years my little brother had been suffering in silence while I slept just feet away. 2 years that woman, who didn't deserve to be called a mother, had been doing those horrible things to a child who couldn't defend himself. "Why didn't you tell me before, Tommy?" She said she'd send me to the orphanage if I told. Said neither you nor Daddy would believe me, that you'd think I was making up stories. Said Daddy would beat me until I couldn't sit down anymore. The cruelty of those threats left me breathless. How could someone be so wicked to a defenseless child? To their own son? At that moment, I felt such great hatred grow inside me that I almost didn't recognize myself. I, who had always been the obedient girl, the daughter who never raised her voice, now could only think about how to make that woman pay for what she had done. "Tommy, listen carefully to what I'm going to tell you," I said, holding his little hands between mine. "She lied. Daddy would never think you were making things up, would never beat you, and would never ever send you to any orphanage. Our father is a good man, a real man, who loves us more than anything in this world. And I love you too, my little brother, and I'll protect you no matter what." He looked at me with those big, sad eyes, as if he wanted to believe but was afraid to hope. "Promise, Millie? Promise you won't let her do that again?" "I promise, Tommy. By the light in my eyes, I promise she'll never lay a finger on you again." I didn't send Tommy to school that day. I bathed him, made cornmeal porridge with milk, which was his favorite, and spent the day telling stories, trying to make him smile again. But it was as if a part of my brother had been torn away, an innocence that would never return. In the days that followed, I didn't leave Tommy alone for a minute. Wherever I went, I took him with me. At bedtime, I put his mattress in my room and locked the door with the key I secretly took from the storage room door. When Mama came home, usually in the middle of the night or sometimes after being gone for days, I pretended to be asleep, but actually kept my eyes open, a broom handle under the bed, ready to defend my brother if necessary. Daddy noticed something had changed, of course. He noticed that Tommy wouldn't leave my side, that I locked the bedroom door at night, that I became tense every time Mama approached my brother. "What's going on, Millie?" he asked one night while I was washing the dinner dishes. Tommy had already gone to bed. Mama had left saying she was going to the prayer meeting, and it was just the two of us in the small kitchen lit by the kerosene lamp. I almost told him everything right then. The words were on the tip of my tongue, wanting to jump out. But then I thought, what if Mama was right? What if Daddy didn't believe me? Worse, what if he believed but didn't have the courage to do anything? To face the situation? To face her? "It's nothing, Daddy. It's just that Tommy's been having nightmares, so I let him sleep with me." Daddy looked at me with those tired eyes that seemed to see beyond what I was saying. He put his calloused hand on my shoulder and squeezed gently. "When you want to talk for real, Millie, I'm here." Those words echoed in my head for days. I wanted so badly to trust him, to tell him everything, to share that terrible burden that was crushing me. But the fear, oh, fear is a nasty beast that gnaws at you from within, making you doubt even what you're sure of. Meanwhile, Mama seemed to be getting more and more out of control. Her outings were longer. She came back more drunk, more disheveled. Sometimes she brought expensive gifts she could never buy with the little money Daddy gave her for groceries. A new hat, a French perfume, a pearl necklace she swore was a gift from the lady of the house, where she claimed to have started working as a housekeeper. Daddy pretended to believe, but I could see the distrust in his eyes, the sadness that was transforming into something harder, colder. He wasn't a fool. The neighbors' malicious comments reached him, the pitying looks from the other men at the mine, the whispers that stopped when he approached. One night, Daddy came home earlier from work. It wasn't normal. He always returned after sunset. But that day, Around 4 in the afternoon, I heard his steps coming up the porch. I was in the kitchen, preparing beans for dinner, and Tommy was playing with some wooden cars Daddy had made for him. When Daddy entered, I knew right away something was wrong. His face was different, paler, his eyes more sunken. "Where's your mother?" he asked, his voice firmer than usual. "She left about 2 hours ago. Said she was going to the drugstore for headache medicine." He gave a dry laugh with no humor at all. He went to the bedroom and came back with a small wooden box he kept under the bed. He opened it and took out a yellowed envelope. "You know what this is, Millie? It's the savings of a lifetime. Every penny I managed to save breaking my back under that sun. It was to buy a better house for us, to provide education for Tommy, for you." My heart sank. I knew where this conversation was heading. "But now there's only this." He showed some crumpled bills, less than half of what I remembered seeing the last time he opened that box, about 6 months ago. "The rest is gone. A little bit each week, thinking I wouldn't notice." I didn't know what to say. It was one more piece in the puzzle of destruction that Mama had been putting together for years. "Daddy, You don't need to say anything, my daughter. It's not your fault. It never was." He put the money back in the envelope, closed the box. "I just need you to take care of Tommy today. I'm going to settle some business in town." Something in his tone frightened me. It was the tone of someone who had made a difficult decision after suffering for a long time. For the first time, I saw in my father not the submissive man everyone thought he was, but someone who had endured more than any person should, out of love for his children. "Daddy, there's something I need to tell you. It's about Mama and Tommy." He stopped at the door, his hand already on the knob. He turned slowly, his eyes fixed on mine. "What about Mama and Tommy?" I took a deep breath. It was now or never. The words started to come out, slowly at first, then in a flood I couldn't control anymore. I told him everything I had seen that night, what Tommy had told me, the 2 years of abuse my little brother had suffered in silence. Tears streamed down my face as I spoke, but I kept my voice firm, because that truth needed to be told, no matter how painful it was. When I finished, I expected to see shock, disbelief, even anger on my father's face, but what I saw was different. I saw a frightening calm, like the calm that comes before the most violent storm. His eyes, always so gentle, had darkened, and his hands, which had never been raised against anyone, were closed into fists so tight that the knuckles were white. "How long have you known about this, Millie?" "For 2 weeks, Daddy. I wanted to tell you before, but I was afraid that you wouldn't believe me, or that you couldn't do anything, or that I was too weak to protect my children." Shame burned inside me. That was exactly what I had thought. "Forgive me, Daddy." He came to me, hugged me tight, then knelt down to be at Tommy's height, who had hidden behind my skirts when I started crying. "My son," he said in a choked voice, "forgive me for not protecting you as a father should, but this ends today. You have my word." I'll never forget the look my father and my brother exchanged at that moment. It was a look of understanding, forgiveness, and something more. A silent promise that nothing would be the same again. Daddy stood up, wiped away a stubborn tear that had escaped, and adjusted his hat on his head. "Lock the door after I leave. Don't open it for anyone until I return." "Not even for Mama?" Tommy asked in his weak voice. "Especially not for her," Daddy replied, and left, shutting the door behind him. That night seemed endless. After Daddy left, I locked all the doors and windows as he had ordered. I made Tommy eat dinner, even though he hardly wanted to eat anything, and put him to bed early. I lay down beside him, stroking his hair until he fell asleep. But I stayed awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, my heart in my throat, imagining what Daddy might be doing. The hours dragged like snails. Every noise outside made me jump. Every shadow that passed through the crack in the window froze my blood. It must have been close to midnight when I heard footsteps on the porch. They weren't my father's firm steps, but the shuffling of feet of someone who could barely stand. "Open this door, Mildred," Mama shouted in the slurred voice of someone who had drunk themselves into a stupor. "I know you're in there, disobedient girl." I stayed as still as a statue, my hand covering my mouth to make no sound, praying that Tommy wouldn't wake up. "Open up now, or I'll break down this door," she continued, now pounding on the wood forcefully. Who do you think you are to leave me outside my own house? For a moment, I was afraid she might actually break down the door, but then I heard another voice outside, a man's voice that wasn't my father's. Leave it, Caroline. Let's go to my place, it's better. Tomorrow, you can sort out this fight with the kids. It was the voice of Norman, a guy who had arrived in town a few months ago, saying he was a commercial representative, but everyone knew he lived off gambling and shady business. A man with greased hair and a fake smile who always walked with a toothpick in the corner of his mouth and an expensive cigar in his hand. The silence that followed was broken by a high-pitched laugh from my mother, followed by the sound of kisses and whispers I preferred not to understand. Then, the sound of footsteps moving away. And finally, nothing. I sighed with relief, but I knew it was only a temporary truce. Mama would return, and when she did, she would be furious. I just hoped Daddy would arrive before that. I must have fallen asleep at some point because I woke up startled by the sound of the front door opening. I jumped out of bed, ready to scream, when I heard my father's voice calling softly, "Millie? Tommy? It's me." I ran barefoot down the hallway and found Daddy standing in the living room, his face tired, but with a different expression, lighter, as if he had lifted a weight off his shoulders. "Where were you, Daddy?" I was worried. "Resolving what I should have resolved a long time ago, my daughter," he replied, taking off his hat and hanging it on the entrance coat rack. "Did your mother show up here?" "Yes, but not alone. She was with Norman, that guy from the store." Daddy shook his head, not seeming the least bit surprised. "Better that way. Tomorrow bright and early I want you both dressed and with a bundle of clothes ready. We're leaving this place." When I heard this, my heart froze completely. If you're enjoying this, don't forget to like this video now because the best is yet to come. "Where are we going, Daddy?" "To my sister's house in Louisville. I've already talked to her on the store's telephone. They're expecting us. There we'll start a new life. Just the three of us." I didn't ask anything else. The determination on my father's face said everything I needed to know. I went back to the room, where Tommy was still sleeping, oblivious to everything, and I lay down trying to imagine what this new life Daddy promised would be like. The next morning, barely had the sun appeared, when the three of us were sitting by the roadside waiting for Mr. Hank's truck that went to Louisville once a week, carrying goods. Each with a bundle of clothes, Daddy with his little wooden box of savings, me with the cloth doll my late grandma had made, Tommy with a wooden car he wouldn't let go of for anything. "And Mama?" Tommy asked, when the truck appeared around the bend in the road, raising red dust. "Your mother chose another path, son," Daddy answered in a firm but not harsh voice. "Sometimes in life, it's like that. People choose different paths and can no longer go together." It wasn't the whole truth, of course, but it was enough for a 7-year-old boy to understand at that moment. The rest he would know when he was older, when he could understand that some people aren't born to be mothers, that there are monsters who hide behind pretty faces, and that sometimes love isn't enough to fix someone who is broken inside. As the truck moved away from town, I looked back one last time. Our little house was getting smaller in the distance, until it was just a white dot surrounded by the green of the vegetation. I didn't feel sadness, not even nostalgia. What I felt was relief, as if escaping from a prison where I had lived too long. What I didn't know was that we were leaving behind much more than a house. We were leaving the end of one nightmare and the beginning of another kind of story, one that I would only fully understand many years later. The journey to Louisville took almost a full day. Tommy slept most of the way, his head on Daddy's lap, rocked by the bouncing of the truck on the dirt roads. I stayed watching the landscape change, the dry country giving way to greener areas as we approached the Ohio River. We arrived at the beginning of the night. Aunt Martha, Daddy's older sister, whom I barely knew, was waiting for us at the door of her house, a simple but tidy building on the outskirts of the city. She was an elderly lady, widowed for many years, who lived alone since her only son had moved to New York in search of work. "Joseph, my brother!" she exclaimed, hugging Daddy tightly. Then she turned to us two, her eyes shining with emotion. "And these are my niece and nephew? How you've grown! The last time I saw you, Mildred was a baby in arms, and Tommy wasn't even dreamed of yet. We were received with clean beds, hot food on the table, and something we hadn't felt for a long time: peace. That first night, after so long, I slept without fear that the bedroom door would open in the middle of the night. In the weeks that followed, we adapted to the new life. Daddy got a job in construction, which paid better than the mine and wasn't as hard on the body. I started helping Aunt Martha make the jams she sold at the market, learning recipes that I still use today. Tommy entered the local school and gradually started to become the happy boy he was before, although some invisible scars remained. It was only after a month that I had the courage to ask my father what had really happened. That night, he left the house after learning the truth about Mama. We were sitting on the back porch after dinner. Aunt Martha had already retired, and Tommy was playing with some cars Daddy had made for him. "Daddy," I began hesitantly, "what did you do when you left the house that night, after I told you about what Mama was doing to Tommy?" Daddy was silent for a while, looking at the stars shining in the dark sky. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "I went after the truth, Millie. All the truth your mother was hiding. First, I went to Miss Sally's place, that one at the end of town everyone pretends doesn't exist. I asked about her, and the girls there laughed in my face. 'Mr. Thompson, your wife doesn't work here. She comes to spend your money with the men she brings.' It was like a slap in the face to hear that, but I continued. Daddy lit a cigarette, took a deep drag before continuing. 'Then I went to Norman's house. That guy always hit on your mother, even in front of me, disrespecting our home. He wasn't there, but a neighbor said he had seen him and your mother leaving together earlier, heading for the Central Hotel. The Central Hotel was the only hotel in town where travelers passing through Pine Hollow stayed. It wasn't a respectable place for a married woman to be. I went there. The receptionist was a friend of my cousin, didn't want to stop me. I went up to the room and, well, I found your mother with him. I won't go into details because there are certain things a daughter doesn't need to know about her mother. But I confronted her. I said I knew everything, the affairs, the money she stole, and especially what she did to Tommy." Daddy stopped, his voice choked with emotion and contained anger. "She laughed, Millie, laughed in my face and said I was too weak to do anything, that she always knew she could do whatever she wanted because I would never have the courage to react. And Norman, that coward, stood there, smiling from the corner, as if I were a joke. Even after so long, the memory still seemed to deeply hurt my father. That's when I did what I should have done a long time ago. I took that small recorder that Dr. Wilson's son had lent me. Remember him? The boy who liked to play reporter? That was hidden in my pocket and showed it to her. I had recorded everything. Her confession about Tommy, about the money, about the men, everything. I was speechless. I never imagined that my father, so simple and straightforward, had planned something like that. I told her I would take that recording to the sheriff, to the pastor, to the entire town to hear if necessary, that she would be arrested for what she did to Tommy, that she would lose everything, that everyone would know what kind of monster was hiding behind that pretty face. The way Daddy said that, without shouting, without gesturing, just with a cold and calculated certainty, showed me a side of him I had never seen before. "And did she believe you?" I asked, holding my breath. She believed. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in your mother's eyes. Not fear of me, but fear of what others would think, of what she would lose. That was always her greatest terror, that people would see who she really was. Daddy stubbed out his cigarette in an old tin ashtray. "We made a deal right there. She would stay with Norman, since that's what she wanted, and the three of us would disappear from town. She would never look for us again, never try to see you or Tommy again. In exchange, I wouldn't show the recording to anyone. And you trusted her? After everything?" "No, Millie, I didn't trust her. That's why I came so far away, to Aunt Martha's house, that your mother didn't even know existed. And I left a copy of the recording with Dr. Wilson, sealed, with instructions to be opened if anything happened to me or to you two." That's when I understood. My father, that quiet man everyone thought was submissive, had planned everything down to the smallest detail. He had thought of every possibility, every way out, not for revenge, but for protection. To protect his children, to give us a chance at a new life, away from that poison that had infiltrated our family. Is that why we never saw her again? I asked in a small voice, feeling an enormous relief to know that chapter was really closed. Yes, my daughter. Your mother chose her path, and we chose ours. Some knots are meant to be untied when they start to suffocate. That night, lying in bed in my new room, with the smell of flowers from the soap Aunt Martha used on the sheets, I cried. Not for the mother I had lost, in fact, a mother I never really had, but for the silent courage of my father, who had endured so much for our sake, and who, when the time of truth came, knew exactly what to do to save us. Our life in Louisville continued like a river that finds its natural course after passing through rocks and rapids. The days became weeks, the weeks months, and before I realized it, it had been a year since we had left Pine Hollow and all the horrors we lived through there. Daddy worked steadily in construction, soon being promoted to foreman for the care and responsibility he put into everything he did. Tommy had adapted well to the new school, making friends, getting good grades, gradually returning to being the happy and talkative boy he was before everything happened. And I, at 14 at the time, helped Aunt Martha with the jams and attended school in the afternoon. We were rebuilding our lives, piece by piece, like someone reassembling a broken mirror. The scars were there, invisible but present, especially in Tommy, who sometimes woke up screaming in the middle of the night, sweating cold, his eyes wide with terror. At these times, Daddy would go to his room, sit on the edge of the bed, and stay there until he went back to sleep, his large, calloused hand stroking my brother's hair with a tenderness you wouldn't expect from a man of that size. I thought we would never hear from my mother again, that she had disappeared from our lives forever, as Daddy had planned. But fate, that relentless weaver, had other plans. One Saturday afternoon, when we were returning from the market after helping Aunt Martha sell her jams, we found an unknown young man standing at the door of our house. He was a thin fellow, about 20 years old, with traveler's clothes and a worn suitcase in his hand. "Are you Joseph Thompson?" he asked when Daddy approached. "I am." "What can I do for you, young man?" "I'm Jeremy, Dr. Wilson's son from Pine Hollow. My father sent me to deliver this to you personally." He extended a yellowed envelope, sealed with red wax. Daddy took it, furrowing his brow, surprised. It had been more than a year since we had had contact with anyone from our old town. "Has something happened, sir?" I asked, feeling a chill in my stomach. "I don't know the details, miss. My father just told me it was urgent that Mr. Thompson receive this letter as soon as possible." Daddy invited the young man in, offered coffee, but he declined, saying he needed to continue his journey that afternoon. After the young man left, the three of us and Aunt Martha sat at the kitchen table while Daddy carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written in Dr. Wilson's small, neat handwriting, and a newspaper clipping already yellowed by time. Daddy read the letter in silence, his face growing paler, then without saying anything, passed it for us to see the newspaper clipping. It was a small news item, the kind that appears in the corner of the page. "Woman's body found on river bank." The body of Caroline Adams Thompson, 33, was found on the banks of the Cumberland River by local fishermen yesterday morning. According to the sheriff in charge, the victim showed signs of beating, and the main line of investigation points to a crime of passion. Norman Davies, with whom the victim maintained a relationship, is a fugitive. I felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. Even after everything she had done, even with all the harm she had caused, seeing the news of my mother's death printed there, so cold and direct, left me breathless. I looked at Tommy, who at 8 years old still didn't quite understand what was happening, then at Daddy, who was holding Dr. Wilson's letter with slightly trembling hands. "What happened to Mama, Daddy?" Tommy asked, his voice uncertain. Daddy folded the newspaper, hiding the news, and put his hand on his shoulder. "Your mother is gone, son. She won't be coming back, ever." That night, after Tommy was asleep, Daddy told me what Dr. Wilson's letter said. According to him, after we left town, Mama and Norman stayed together, spending the money he had from gambling and shady dealings. When the money ran out, the fights began. She threatened to leave him. He wouldn't accept it. According to witnesses, on the night she disappeared, screams had been heard coming from their house. The next day, Norman had already vanished from town, and 2 days later, her body was found by fishermen. Dr. Wilson says the police are looking for Norman, but he probably already crossed the state line into Tennessee, Daddy explained, speaking softly so as not to wake my brother. He also says he destroyed the recording I left with him, as we agreed in case something like this happened. I was silent for a while, processing it all. I didn't know what to feel. Part of me wanted to cry for the mother I had lost. Another part felt a dull anger for everything she had done, and a third part, the one that scared me most, felt relief knowing she could never hurt us again. "Is it our fault, Daddy?" I finally asked, my voice breaking. "If we hadn't left there, if you hadn't made that deal with her." "No, Millie," Daddy interrupted firmly. "It's not our fault. Each person is responsible for their own actions and their own choices. Your mother chose her path knowing the risks. Norman had always been a violent man. Everyone in town knew it. She must have thought she could control him like she did all the other men. But this time, she was wrong." Daddy sighed deeply, running his hand over his tired face. "I won't lie and say I'm sorry. Not after everything she did to Tommy, to you, to me. But I won't celebrate anyone's death, not even hers. Life comes full circle, and you reap what you sow." She planted poison and harvested a storm. That night, lying in my bed, I thought a lot about what Daddy had said, about choices and consequences, about how some people seem to attract their own misfortune through the decisions they make. I thought about my mother, so beautiful and so rotten inside, who preferred the attention of any man to the love of her own children. I thought about her final fate, abandoned and beaten by the same kind of man she always sought out. Was it revenge? Not the kind Daddy had planned with the recording. A clean, calculated revenge, meant to protect, not to destroy. But perhaps it was the revenge of life itself, that relentless judge who sooner or later collects the debt from each of us. Several months passed. The news of Mama's death was slowly processed by each of us in our own way. Daddy seemed lighter, as if a weight had finally lifted from his shoulders. Tommy, after a few nights of renewed nightmares, finally seemed to begin healing the deepest wounds, perhaps because he instinctively knew he was truly safe now. I took longer. There were so many mixed feelings inside me, anger, sadness, guilt, relief, that I sometimes felt suffocated by them. It was Aunt Martha who noticed my internal struggle, and, with her wisdom as a woman who had seen much in life, called me for a talk. "You know, Millie," she said, as we made caramel together, "when my husband died, I felt so many things at once that I thought I would go crazy. Sadness for the loss, anger because he left me alone, guilt for not seeing the signs of the illness sooner, and even relief because the last months, with him wasting away in bed, had been torment for us both." She stirred the caramel in the copper pot with slow, precise movements. "What I learned is that all these feelings can exist at the same time, without one diminishing the force of the other. You can feel anger toward your mother for what she did, and still feel sadness for the end she met. You can feel relief, knowing she will never hurt your brother again, and at the same time feel guilty for that relief. Don't try to choose just one feeling, girl. We're not that simple." Her words fell like fresh water in the desert of my confusion. Gradually, I learned to live with this internal storm, to accept that I could feel contradictory things without it making me a worse person. One day, almost a year after the news of Mama's death, Daddy gathered us at the table after dinner. He had a serious expression, the kind he made when he needed to tell us something important. "I have news," he began, looking first at me, then at Tommy. "I received an offer to work on a big construction project in Cincinnati. They pay well, provide housing, and most importantly, it's a chance to start over in a big city where nobody knows us, where no shadow from the past can reach us." Aunt Martha, who was sitting beside him, smiled sadly. "I'll miss you all, but your father is right. Cincinnati is the future. You children will have better schools, more opportunities." That's how 2 months later we said goodbye to Louisville and Aunt Martha, promising to visit, and boarded a bus to Cincinnati, Ohio. Daddy was right. It was truly a new beginning. A huge city, full of colors, smells, and sounds, so different from the rural areas we knew. Our house was in a housing development for the construction company's workers, small but clean and airy, with a view of the river in the distance. Daddy prospered in his new job, being promoted within a few years to construction manager. Tommy grew up strong and healthy, showing a talent for studies that made Daddy swell with pride. And I, besides continuing my education, started making cloth dolls to sell, using what I had learned from Aunt Martha, but creating my own style. It was in Cincinnati that I met Arthur, a young man who worked as an electrician on the projects Daddy managed. He was a serious, hard-working man from a simple family like ours. We started dating when I was 17, always with Daddy's consent and supervision, as was the custom in those days. The day Arthur asked for my hand in marriage, Daddy took him for a private conversation on the porch. I was nervous, imagining what they might be talking about, but when they returned, both had smiles on their faces. "Your father told me everything, Millie," Arthur told me later when we were alone. "About your mother, about what happened to your brother, about how you left town. He said I had the right to know what family I was entering." I was paralyzed, my heart in my throat. Daddy had never told that story to anyone outside the family. And now Arthur knew everything, the shame, the horror, the scars we carried. "And what do you think about that?" I asked, barely able to breathe. "I think your father is the most admirable man I've ever met," he replied without hesitation. "I think you and your brother are survivors, warriors, and I think I'm even prouder that you've agreed to be my wife." We married in the spring of 1957, in a simple ceremony at the neighborhood church. Daddy gave us half of the savings he had accumulated as a gift, so we could buy our own little house. Tommy, already 14 years old, tall and handsome, was my best man, looking like a little man in Daddy's borrowed suit that Aunt Martha had adjusted for him. On that day, looking at my gathered family, Daddy emotional as he gave me away at the altar, Tommy smiling proudly beside me, Aunt Martha, who had come specially from Louisville for the ceremony, and Arthur waiting for me before the minister, I realized that my father's revenge had been the most perfect possible. Not a revenge of blood, violence, destruction, but a revenge of life, of rebuilding, of love. He hadn't just taken us out of the hell that Mama had created. He had built a new heaven for us, piece by piece, day after day, with the same patience and determination with which he built his construction projects. Daddy's true revenge against everything Mama represented was showing that goodness can be stronger than evil, that love builds while hate destroys, and that even after the worst storms, it's possible to find the sun again. The years passed like pages of a book turned by the wind. The black strands of my hair turned white, smooth hands gained wrinkles and calluses. Dreams became memories, and the memories became the fortress I built to shelter me in old age. My life with Arthur was a blessing. We had 3 children: Joseph, who received my father's name, Martha, in honor of my dear aunt, and Thomas, whom everyone calls Tommy, like my brother. We raised them with love, firmness, and primarily with truth. I never hid our family story from my children, telling them when they were old enough to understand, without unnecessary details, but also without lies that could grow and become monsters bigger than the truth itself. Daddy lived with us after he retired. We built a small room at the back of our house, with an independent entrance so he could have privacy, but close enough to share meals, conversations, the joys and sorrows of daily life. He was a wonderful grandfather, patient and wise, teaching my children everything he knew about carpentry, construction, fishing, and especially about the value of honest work and family. Tommy, my brother, became a teacher. He studied so diligently, taking advantage of every opportunity Cincinnati offered, that he managed to enter college even coming from a simple family. He was the first in our family to have a degree, a source of immense pride for Daddy, who cried like a child on graduation day. Tommy married a colleague from the school where he taught, a sweet woman named Margaret, and they had 2 children who are the light of his eyes to this day. The traumas of childhood left scars on my brother, of course. There were difficult periods, especially in adolescence, when the nightmares returned with force, when the anger about what had happened seemed to consume him from within. But with the support of family, with Daddy's unwavering love, and later with the love of his wife and children, he managed to transform that pain into strength to help others. As a teacher, he took special care with children who showed signs of abuse or neglect, knowing how to recognize signs that others might ignore. Daddy left us in 1982, at 76 years old, sleeping peacefully in his little bed in the back room. It was a serene passage, as a man who had carried so many burdens in life deserved. At the funeral, I was impressed by the number of people who came to say goodbye. Colleagues from construction, neighbors, church friends, even former clients from projects he had managed years earlier. All with stories about how Joseph Thompson had been fair, honest, hard-working, always willing to help anyone in need. "Your father was a good man," said an elderly gentleman who had worked with him on the first project in Cincinnati. "The kind you don't find anymore these days. I never saw him raise his voice to anyone, but I also never saw anyone disrespect him." Hearing these testimonies, I fully understood the silent greatness of my father. A man the whole town saw as weak for not controlling his wife, for letting her carry on, had in fact an inner strength few could comprehend. The strength of someone who places his children's well-being above his own pride, who knows that true courage sometimes lies in enduring silently, in waiting for the right moment to act. As for my mother, for many years I tried to bury her memory along with her body, thrown on the riverbank like something disposable. I didn't want to think about her, didn't want to remember her face, her voice, the smell of cigarettes and cheap perfume she left in the air when she went out at night. But with age, with the wisdom that only years bring, I began to understand that we cannot erase parts of our history, however painful they may be. Caroline was a product of her time, her upbringing, perhaps traumas I never knew. This doesn't justify what she did. Nothing could justify the horror she inflicted on Tommy, the betrayal of Daddy, the abandonment of her responsibilities as a mother. But over time, I learned to separate the hatred for her actions from the person herself. I learned that I could acknowledge the evil she had done without letting that evil continue to poison me decades later. In 1995, already 57 years old, with several grandchildren running around the house, I took a trip I had long postponed. I returned to Pine Hollow, accompanied by my brother Tommy. Our Aunt Martha had passed away a few years earlier. We had no more family there, but we felt the need to visit the place where everything began, to face the ghosts that might still haunt us. The town had changed a lot. More paved streets, more brick houses, less red dust, more businesses. Our old house didn't even exist anymore. In its place was a small hardware store. The warehouse where Norman used to stay had also been demolished, giving way to a pharmacy. We went to the local cemetery, where we knew Mama was buried. It took time to find the grave, a simple cross, no headstone, with just the name and dates, almost erased by time and neglect. I stood looking at that piece of earth for a long time, feeling a strange mixture of emotions. "Do you still feel anger?" Tommy asked suddenly, his voice low, reverent, as befits a cemetery. "No," I replied after thinking a bit. "I don't feel anger. I feel pity. Pity that she never knew her grandchildren. Pity that she wasted the chance to have a family that loved her. Pity that she lived and died without ever understanding what really matters in this life." Tommy nodded, his watery eyes fixed on the abandoned cross. "You know what I feel, Millie. Gratitude. Not to her, of course, but to our father, to you, to Aunt Martha. Gratitude that you didn't let what she did completely destroy me, for saving me not just from the horror of that house, but from becoming someone full of hatred, someone too broken to love, to trust." We left the cemetery hand in hand, as we did when crossing the street as children. Two survivors, two warriors carrying invisible scars, but who had learned to use those scars as a source of strength, not weakness. Today, at 87 years old, sitting in my rocking chair on the porch of the colorful little house I built with so much love, I watch my great-grandchildren playing in the garden and feel a peace I never imagined possible in the dark days of my childhood. Life takes so many turns. Fate has such mysterious paths. What seems an unbearable curse at one moment can be the seed of an indestructible strength later on. My father's revenge, that silent, calculated revenge, made of love, not hate, continues bearing fruit to this day, 3 generations later. It's in the smiles of my grandchildren and great-grandchildren who grow up without fear, without toxic secrets, without the crushing weight of silence that protects monsters and suffocates victims. It's in the strength I discovered within myself, which allowed me to survive, love, build a beautiful life, despite everything. Those of you who have followed me to this point, listening to the account of an old lady who has seen more winters than many of you will live, know that no matter how dark the night, the sun always rises again. No matter how terrible the storm, there is always shelter to be found, sometimes in the arms of those we love, sometimes in the strength we didn't even know we had within us. If this story touched your heart in some way, please leave your like so others may know it too. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because each message makes me feel I'm not alone sharing this heavy burden. And subscribe to Grandparents' Tales to follow other stories of women who, like me, found strength where there seemed to be none. Life isn't always easy, my dears, but it is always, always worth living. With love, courage, and the silent determination I learned from my father, we can transform even the worst pain into strength to move forward. This is Miss Millie the Doll Lady, thanking you for listening to my story.